Seeing all the talk about one Hamilton has made me think of another. Not Alexander, but William. Not revolution, but discovery of the principles of energy and motion in classical mechanics. Classical mechanics is the study of how matter and energy moves. Since the time of Newton, motion has been presented as the way in which objects change their position and velocity with respect to time. For Newton and later contributors from Lagrange and Laplace to Hamilton and Maxwell, time was built into the universe by the watchmaker God. It was the medium through which motion occurred. Einstein objected to time having a special role in mechanics. He argued that physical laws should have no special directions in space or time. Instead, they ought to be generally covariant. Einstein later showed that time is like a dimension, and that our perception of time is not universal, but dependent on our state of motion. Quantities that we thought had strict dependencies on time turned out to covary when their motion changed. In a way, Einstein eliminated much of the role time had in defining motion for, in his theory of relativity, it became more like any other direction in which an object or field could morph and change. Time lost much of its specialness. As scientists started to use Einstein's theory in more practical ways, particularly for the study of the universe as a whole, however, the need for a theory of time became more and more apparent. Attempts to develop theories of motion led to the development of time-based cosmologies, such as the expanding Robertson-Walker universe. Others developed the theory of geometrodynamics, the study of how space-time geometry changes in time. Wheeler and DeWitt created their famous quantum gravity equation for how the quantum wave function of the universe evolves. All of these ideas scream the primacy of time. Yet Einstein's original objections to time remained. How can there be a special direction in space-time? And if there is, then why does it exist? Occam's razor would suggest that all theories should explain why one direction is preferred over another. We can't go back to Newton's day. Relativity shows us in countless ways that time cannot be as unique as it appears. One way out of this dilemma is to show how dynamics itself creates time. This approach suggests that rather than motion being change in time, time is motion and change. That is, we have our ideas about time backwards. Time does not really exist, change does. And change does not require time. All it requires are two things: energy and something called a phase space. Energy and phase space are both critical pieces of classical dynamics going back centuries. One way to represent these two ideas is through something called a Hamiltonian. A Hamiltonian, simply put, is an expression for the energy of a dynamical system. It is named after William Rowan Hamilton, who developed his theories on dynamics in the 1830s. Hamiltonians can also depend directly on time. If it does, you know it doesn't represent a closed system. A time dependence indicates that the system is exchanging energy with something else not represented. An example might be a small, hot piece of metal thrown into a cold lake. The Hamiltonian could only represent the metal and not the lake, even though the metal is losing energy to the lake. Solving Hamilton's equations is one thing, but what about the equations themselves? It turns out that Hamilton's equations define what is called a flow field or vector field. The flow theory of the nature of time actually comes out of the idea of a flow field. It says that rather than time being the fundamental medium through which systems move through phase space, it is the system of the universe as a whole that defines a flow through phase space, and that flow defines time itself. Thus, we have the whole idea of time backward. We think that motion happens in time, but in fact, time happens in motion. If you go back to Hamilton's equations, you can see, in fact, that time only appears on the left-hand sides of the equations. As long as the Hamiltonian is for a closed system, as the universe is, then you do not need time at all to define the Hamiltonian or the flow field that it generated. Therefore, the flow field doesn't equate to motion in time, it defines what time itself is. If your Hamiltonian is generally covariant, that is, it doesn't represent time as special, it can still create time from its own flow. The universe is just evolving over a level set, following a flow, and that flow is what we perceive as time. Thank you for watching, and until we meet among the stars again, keep dreaming big and exploring the infinite.